Because I didn't end up having much to say from review to review during my reviews of RWBY's 4th season, I decided that for its 5th season, I would try reviewing the entire season as a whole, as I have been reminded many times over that RWBY as a show is designed for each of its seasons, each of its volumes, to be viewed all together once their airing is complete. And while at the end of the day I think that's a really stupid excuse for your individual episodes feeling lackluster, as they are aired weekly as separate episodes and therefore need to track as separate episodes. I am listening to that criticism and I'm giving this a shot, and honestly, I kind of wish I had swapped the two. I kind of wish I had reviewed Volume 4 all as one volume, because it is better if you go back and watch it all at once, and that I had reviewed this one episode by episode. But at this point, it's too late to change that. Because honestly, the individual episodes of this season felt so much more complete than the individual episodes of last season. Whereas last season, it was primarily about characters wandering around, and the groundwork for the stories of the other characters in this season being laid. This season gives us all the payoff that we didn't get last season, and that obviously fills up time a whole lot better. There are still effectively 4 congruent plots running parallel to each other, each one focusing on one of the 4 titular characters, except now RWBY and her new team have reached their destination. RWBY's Uncle Crow has healed, and the new host to Professor Ozpin's personality joins up with them relatively early on, and so things are able to start moving along pretty quickly. We actually start to get something of a plot. Even a little bit of a status quo is established, though the season is so short and the episodes themselves are so short likewise, that we never really get the opportunity to fall into that status quo along with the characters, which is to the detriment of the story, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Both Yang and Weiss are on their way to the same location that RWBY herself is also at. She doesn't know that they're coming, but she is, in effect, waiting for them to arrive, and I have to admit, I was really excited to see their reunion. And Blake, her story from last season continues. She begins to resist this new corrupted version of the White Fang in Honest, even going so far as to start to recruit members of the regular population of Menagerie into a sort of resistance, an opposition to the White Fang and what they have come to stand for. Her story, I think, to me, was the most thrilling from beginning to end this season, with Weiss's story maybe taking the 2nd place spot in that regard. The story revolving around RWBY and her team was pretty chill again this season, but at least it was more interesting. At least we got some lore as a result of it. And once it becomes clear that even Blake's story is going to be bringing her to the same location as every other member of her old team, I will admit, even though I wasn't really feeling what they were trying to do with this season, I wanted to see those 4 characters back together, because the primary reason I'm watching this show at this point is because I like the characters. I made no secret of the fact that I didn't really like the story of Season 4, and honestly the story of Season 5, apart from Blake's part of the story and apart from Weiss's part of the story, wasn't really much better. And so when finally all 4 of them did share a scene again after so long, that, to me alone, was worth the wait. But I can perfectly understand why other people wouldn't feel that way. The problem with RWBY so far, and the review of this season is pretty much over at this point, so if you guys don't want to hear me just rant, you could probably end the video here or at least skip to the very end. The problem with RWBY so far, I think, has been that it doesn't really know what it wants to be. RWBY has never really had a status quo. And while I am someone who believes that the status quo of any show should be shaken up, or maybe even flat out broken so that it can be repaired into something different, every show should have a status quo, to start out with at the very least, so that when it's shaken up, the impact of that is felt. And RWBY has never really had one. It was never really a magical school kind of show. It was never really a martial arts anime style show. It was never really an adventure show with a quest. But it has at one point or another tried to be all of those things. And it has succeeded in some areas better than others. The show keeps shifting its focus without ever settling on what its focus was to begin with. And couple that with all the confusion that I've talked about before on my channel as to who the actual protagonist of the show is, with the focus of the show constantly shifting between RWBY and Jean, without actually really developing either one of them, and the show just feels disjointed. It ends up not feeling like anything, even though a lot has happened. I understand that they're probably saving a huge amount of character development for RWBY for the main climax of the series, But really, tell me, what has happened to RWBY to change her in these 5 years? I mean, yeah, there's been some development for her character, but does that little bit of development really justify 5 years of this show? But then if Jean is the actual secret protagonist and has been this entire time, that doesn't really matter, does it? Because RWBY is just a viewpoint character observing his development, but then at the end of the day, he hasn't developed that much either. Even if we assume that they are co-protagonists, which they really don't feel like they are, they still haven't really developed enough, even together, to justify 5 years of this show. And that's not to say that I don't like the show, because I do. As I said already, I do like these characters enough that I will continue watching the show. That doesn't make it a good show. The writing on RWBY has never been stellar, aside from a few select scenes. It always made up for it with its great action, and even that has started to fall by the wayside with the death of the original showrunner, Monty Ohm, I believe is how you pronounce his name, who also choreographed most of the fights. The climax to this season was a huge showdown between the seemingly unstoppable Cinder, Emerald, and Mercury, as well as another of Big Bad Salem's inner circle, and RWBY's woefully unprepared team, the only real heavy hitter they had being Crow, which should have been epic, and yet I found very little to actually really love in the action scenes which came about because of this. The best action scene of the season wasn't even between a main character and one of the villains. I'm not going to spoil what it was, because it was good enough that I feel like I shouldn't spoil it, but as good as it was, because I didn't really care about any of the characters involved in it, I didn't feel like it justified this entire season, and it should have felt like that scene justified this entire season. That's the point of a climax. Like I said, I'm not saying this is a bad show. If anything, I'm saying it's a mediocre show. A mediocre show with good, likable characters that I still find good and likable. If you are a RWBY fan already, then of course keep watching it. For all I know, it will turn into a masterpiece by the end. But honestly, if you aren't already a RWBY fan and you're thinking that this season might change your mind, it's not going to. Sorry. All of that said though, guys, as per usual, I'd like to know, what did you think of this volume of RWBY if you have seen it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord. Link in the description. Either way though, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.